The following program was originally broadcast Sunday, April 27th.
Throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
1 minute, 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9
On
knots.
January 28th, the Space Shuttle Challenger blew up over Cape Canaveral in a moment that seared our minds and unleashed a week of national agony and grief for the 7 astronauts and their families.
In 1984, during the Memorial Day weekend, 7 other people died suddenly, violently, in motor vehicle crashes here in Minnesota. For their families, those 7 deaths were surely as agonizing as the loss of the 7 astronauts. But the 7 killed here were anonymous victims. Just 7 more statistics.
Statistics. In America, motor vehicle crashes kill as many people as would die if an airliner were to crash every day.
In Minnesota, last year alone, over 100,000 crashes, more than 45,000 injuries, 610 people dead.
It is simply too much. Too much violence, too much pain, too much death.
So today, WCCO Television, in partnership with the St. Paul Pioneer Press and Dispatch, Roar Paragon Advertising and Public Relations, the St. Paul Companies, and WCCO Radio, have launched Project Lifesaver, a month-long campaign to change the attitudes and behavior of Minnesota drivers, of us, and to change those statistics.
We begin tonight with a special edition of the Moore Report, narrated by Al Austin.
She never walked, she ran. Everything she did with such excitement and vigor all the time. She was always so excited about everything. She was just excited about life, period.
She was 4 years old, Brianna Wallace. She lived with her family in Shoreview.
Oh, I suppose she was like any other kid, only she was ours. And so therefore, we think she was very special. She was. In some of her coloring books, she'd sit for hours and cut and paste and color and draw and make a mess. But she liked to do it, so it didn't bother me. She just was always on the go, but I think her favorite thing to do was to swing. She swung for hours and hours and hours. She just loved to swing. She loved to be outside.
But in early June 2 years ago, Brianna had left her swing. She and her family had gone to a resort in Deer River, Minnesota. She collected rocks and tried to catch butterflies, and she waded into Bowstring Lake. It was a happy 4 days. She didn't want to leave. But at 10:30 in the morning of June 6th, it was time to pile into the Wallace van and head home. They stopped at a Dairy Queen in Garrison, Minnesota, then continued south along the west shore of Lake Mille Lacs. Brianna's mother driving, her aunt, Carol, in the passenger seat. The older kids were in the back on a large fold-down bed playing a board game. Brianna sat in front of them, still working on an ice cream cone. Piled in front of her were luggage, camp stoves, tents, lanterns, and a cooler. A steady stream of cars and trucks passed them, headed north. One of them was an old pickup truck with 3 men in it. The pickup began straying across the highway and, about here, swerved all the way over onto the opposite shoulder, going 60 miles an hour. Carol Simpson, Brianna's aunt, was the first to see something was wrong.
I would say it was probably 10 blocks, 12 blocks ahead when we first realized that this pickup was in our lane.
The Wallace van was moving south at 45 miles an hour. The pickup truck raced toward them along the shoulder of the highway to their right. To their left, heavy northbound traffic. They were squeezed in. There was nowhere to go. And then the pickup swerved into their lane and came right at them.
There was no time to make a decision. And I looked at my sister and I said, that pickup is coming right at us. And she said, I know. And I remember her turning the wheel And my first thought was of the kids in the back. And I turned my body to go back, and that's all I remember.
I heard my mom scream, and she turned around, and then I saw a cooler come, and I saw my cousin just kind of sitting there, and it hit her right in the face, and just kind of broke right in half. And then that's all I remember from what happened in the accident.
The crash occurred at 12:52. The impact stopped the van and the pickup in their tracks, lifted both into the air, and dropped them onto the center of the highway.
It hit coming on the passenger side of the vehicle, on the front bumper and back, and it ripped the whole passenger side of the van in half like a can being opened by a can opener.
She was in a position where she took the only evasive action she could. She was braking.
Highway Patrol Corporal R. Scott McCallan arrived at the scene within 2 minutes.
The little girl was laying on a blanket in approximately this area, and I knelt down and checked to see that she was breathing and her heart was beating, and she was having difficulty breathing. So what I did was I turned her head very carefully, sort of cradled her in my arm to keep her airway open. And I can still see that little girl in my arms with her eyes about half shut. And she was basically dying in my arms.
The blow from the cooler had caused a herniated brain stem. Brianna's brain stopped living. She was taken to Children's Hospital in St. Paul, baptized, and pronounced dead the next day. Everyone else in the van was injured. The force of the crash dragged Justin face down along the length of the van's floor, broke his arm, dislocated his shoulder, tore skin from his face, and chipped several of his teeth. Crunching metal caught Brianna's aunt, Carol, in the side. She lost her spleen, her ankle was broken, her arms, legs, and back injured. Brianna's sister, Casman, spent 6 weeks in the hospital with a badly injured liver. Over in the pickup truck, a passenger named Robert Fredrick was dying of brain injuries. His head bounced back and forth between the front windshield and the back window. The pickup driver, Mark Engen, was thrown out onto the highway.
And the really tragic part of it was had the one with the highest blood alcohol content of the 3 people.
They tested Engen's blood alcohol. It showed .22, more than double the level called legally drunk. He told us he only had 7 beers. How did he have so much alcohol in his system? He says, that's a good question.
But he was definitely drunk when this took place, and the little girl died as a result of it.
Bob Crace, another highway patrol officer who investigated the crash, says Engen's driver's license had been revoked after 11 previous arrests and citations.
2 of which had to deal with driving under the influence. One was 6 months prior to this incident happening, and one was 6 weeks prior to it happening.
Engen was charged with 4 counts of criminal vehicular operation. He finally pled guilty to 1, the death of Brianna. He was given 1 year in Mille Lacs County Jail.
With good time, he'll probably set 2 or 3 months at the very most, and he'll be back out on the road again.
Engen began serving his sentence in February. He is due to get out of jail in 12 days.
Brianna's gone forever. He only gets, what is 1 year? Brianna's gone forever.
On June 10, 1984, Brianna Wallace was buried along with her favorite toys and blankets in a Princeton, Minnesota grave.
You hear about it, but it never happens to you, but it does happen to you. It happens too many times. It happens every day, every hour. It's real sad. It's an awful way to lose someone. 1 minute they're here, the next second they're gone. Don't even have a chance to say goodbye, or they're just gone.
A little girl dies in a car crash. A life ended as it was just beginning. Brianna wasn't the only child to die on Minnesota roads that year. 30 other children under the age of 10 were also killed. 1985 was even worse. These are death certificates from Minnesota car crashes last year. John Paul Fulcher, age 7, dead from head injuries. A car hit him in St. Louis Park. 6-year-old Sarah Elizabeth Kuhn, crushed to death in Cass Lake. Tiffany Viola Giese, 2 years old, hit by a car near Wells, Minnesota. Michael John Lee, cause of death, complete severance of spinal cord, 3 years old. On and on it goes. More than half the 610 people who died on our roads in 1985 were under the age of 30. But the tragedy isn't only the 610 deaths. The state of Minnesota says that 45,205 were injured in car crashes last year. That's 1 in every 100 Minnesotans. One of those people was a Plymouth woman. Here's her story.
We're both very outdoors oriented, and all of our social activities are very physical.
Marie Fredrick of Plymouth was something of a superwoman. Athlete, doctoral student, teacher, administrator, wife, mother, excelling at them all, and still finding time for tennis, biking, sailing, hiking, camping, jogging, socializing. She'd recently been named principal of Edgewood Elementary School.
An exciting time.
Yes, very. Something I'd worked for a long time, and hopefully it'll be there again.
On May 30th, Marie was returning to school from a luncheon. As she crossed Boone Avenue, her car was struck broadside by a pickup truck, and then by another car. It shattered her leg and pelvis. Splinters of the pelvis shot through her body like shrapnel, damaging almost every organ. Only her head was spared injury, probably because she was wearing a seatbelt. She was too badly hurt to be pulled from the wreckage.
And what we had to do, since there was limited room inside the vehicle, was take out the windshield, cut the side stiles on the doors, and peel the top of the car back.
I really didn't realize at the time how severely injured I was. Sometime in either the trauma unit or in intensive care, when I first realized that I was on numerous machines and tubes, leg contraction, and immobile, unable to have any movement at all. I had 2 organs removed and 9 surgical procedures, a lot of heart problems, cardiac arrest several times, respiratory failures. My husband and daughter and family were told many times that this was it. A couple more hours, I'd be in a coma, and then that would be the end. Or you better stay with her tonight because she won't be here in the morning.
Marie was in the hospital for 6 months, 4 of it in intensive care near death. This is her hospital bill. It's the size of a novel. Postage to send it to her was $2.80. The total bill, $250,000 or so. By no means does that describe the real cost of that moment in May.
Now push. Keep going. Push. Keep going. Push.
My daily activity is certainly centered around therapy, as I go 5 or 6 times a week. So I exercise myself 2 to 3 times a day. My husband works with me. I work really hard at getting better at the recovery end.
Sure you don't need a cold washcloth?
It's been almost a year since Marie's accident. Recovery has been slow. She once jogged 5 miles a day. Now pain and exhaustion halt her after a few steps.
But I try not to compare day-to-day progress as much as I do week to week or month to month, and then I see, great strides. But I'm learning to walk with 1 crutch. Any distance, if I were to try and go shopping, I have to be in a wheelchair or anything there. I'm very limited as to what I can do around the house still because of a lot of internal problems. Through all tragedies, through life and disappointments, you learn to appreciate what you lose. But until you lose everything, you forget those small things are such a joy. It's so sudden how everything that you were at one time is taken away. You're kind of robbed. I've been robbed of my profession, of my social life, of my my physical abilities, my role as a wife, as a mother, as just a housekeeper. I wish a lot. I guess you can't help but wishing it wouldn't have happened, or how it could have been different if if it could have been avoided.
I've been a state trooper for 17 years. In that length of time, I've investigated a lot of accidents.
Scott McKellen, one of the officers who investigated Brianna Wallace's death, is a 17-year veteran of the Highway Patrol. He's an accident reconstructionist, a detective of sorts, who visits the scenes of serious accidents to find out exactly what happened.
Area of impact.
McKellen has investigated hundreds of crashes during his years with the patrol, but he especially remembers one weekend last May.
The first weekend in May last year was one of the deadliest weekends on Minnesota highways. We killed 17 people and injured over 400 on that weekend. It was simply not a safe weekend to travel Minnesota roads.
17 dead, more than 400 injured. Not from war or a tornado. No one used the word disaster to describe what happened. It was just an ordinary weekend. What did happen? We tried to put that ordinary weekend back together again with the help of the Highway Patrol. Friday, May 3rd, was sunny and warm. High school kids were dressing for proms. It was a slow news day. The lead story was Knuckleick, the Minnesota Zoo's beluga whale. He was sick.
I would have bought it back. It would have been all fine and dandy because that engine's built to beat hell, but...
In nearby Rosemount, Todd Evanoff spent the morning working on his Jeep. His best friend, 21-year-old Tim Neal, was helping him. Tim was engaged to Todd's sister, Tony. They'd gone together for years and had a 2-year-old son. Todd and Tim had one other thing in common, a love of motorcycles.
We were going to go out to Lakeville to get some parts for my Jeep. And then I talked to Tim, and he said he wanted to go. We just left, and we were going across the road there.
It was here, entering Highway 52 near the Coke refinery. They were on Todd's motorcycle. Todd wore a helmet. Tim, hanging on behind him, did not. They crossed the two northbound lanes and were turning left south onto the highway. It was 11 o'clock in the morning.
And I came across there, and I looked to my right, and I seen one truck, and he was in the far lane. So there was nothing in my lane, so I pulled out into my lane. And the next thing I remember is the truck screaming by, and it was just inches off my handlebars, and it blew us out and then sucked us back under.
He had misjudged and had turned into the path of a semi.
Motorcycle struck the rear duals and then was pulled for a distance, and then the duals would have run over the motorcycle.
I could see what was going to happen and about to stop.
Stephen Bernick was approaching the intersection from the other direction in his semi.
Well, once the sickle, he shot out and went right underneath, back by the back tires underneath the trailer there, and the passenger on the back, he was just like if he was catapulted off of that bike. And I'd say the first time he must have went, about close to 20 feet up into the air, and he came down, and maybe 25 feet later he hit the ground and just bounced, and all I could just see was arms and legs going through the air. And Todd there, he was just more or less sliding and rolling.
The next thing I remember after that was laying on the highway looking at my leg. There's a big puddle of blood on the middle of the road, and people were running all over the place yelling.
Todd was in a coma for 3 weeks. Both his elbows and his right leg broken, a third of his calf torn away, his hip broken in 3 places. He was still in a coma when they buried his friend Tim. Tim died at the scene of massive head injuries. The Highway Patrol says a helmet might have saved him.
And I flew down the road some 200 yards from where I got hit, and I'm alive. And I was wearing a helmet and leather jacket. But maybe it's luck. I don't know.
"10 months after the accident, Todd visited Tim's grave for the first time. His sister Tony, mother of Tim's child, was with him.
That's weird to actually look at it. At least 21 years old.
Just be thankful you're not in the ground, too.
I think Tim's biggest regret about dying is that he could not see his son grow. All I have to do is look at my grandchild and I see him all over. Even that little nasty grin and that twinkle in his eye, it's the same.
Well, that's it. Can't tell much about it now. It was one of the fastest things around, though. Was.
Todd has lost some of the use of his arms. He also had head injuries and has trouble remembering things. He does have one haunting memory, his best friend dying on the back of his motorcycle.
You got to know me, I guess. I'm kind of crazy. I was. I've been riding since I was a little tyke, and it's going to take more than this before I'll stop riding. I mean, I love them.
You know, 21 home runs in 84.
The Minnesota Twins were hot that Friday evening. They were playing the Baltimore Orioles. Minnesota had won its last 10 in a row. Shortly after 8 that same Friday evening, up in Cass Lake, a Plymouth sedan struck a Chevy Suburban broadside. The crash killed 2 passengers, Terrence Dana Donnelly and John Patrick Joyce, both 13 years old. And at 2:47 that Saturday morning, 17-year-old Richard Tabor borrowed his girlfriend's blue Ford and smashed it into the pillar of a Minneapolis bridge. Tabor died at the crash scene. Officials told his family he was legally drunk at the time of his death.
He was driving. There was him and 3 of his friends, and apparently they'd been out. I don't know where they were coming from. And they were driving too fast, and the patrol officer said apparently when he come around the curve, he lost control. Rich was a typical teenager. He liked concerts and music. Rich had a lot going for him. He was a bright kid. He was good looking. He was a good kid.
Saturday afternoon, Lake Florida in central Minnesota.
It was a day that we had planned to go to the lake and kind of get things ready for the Memorial Day weekend. We decided to have a quick meal there before we'd left. It was a beautiful day out. The sun was shining and nice and high. We had a barbecued dinner. Oh, it was around 4 o'clock or so.
Wayne Foss and his family headed back to the Twin Cities after the barbecue. 9 people, 3 generations of them, loaded into their suburban van. No one put on a seatbelt. It was now 6 o'clock Saturday evening. Highway 12 at Litchfield. Wayne Foss, driving, noticed an older model car in the oncoming lane drifting into his lane.
I was going for the ditch, and I think I no more than hit the shoulder. And bingo, that was contact.
It was just a head-on collision. I saw the van buckle up and the car buckle up and the van turn on its side, and a little bit of, a puff of smoke maybe from a radiator. That was about it.
Dean Sanger was driving in front of the Foss's car and saw the head-on collision in his rearview mirror. He stopped and ran back to help.
When you've never seen death before, it happened right there. And when you actually watch a lady lay there and breathe her last breath and be all bent out of shape and have her head not in the position where it would normally be and bent back, it's a lot worse than what you could ever see on TV.
It was quiet for a while. Now, I'm probably talking only a few seconds. My son was laying on top of me, and I figured he was gone, but nobody would tell me that. And I didn't know where my wife was at. I didn't know where the baby was at. And when they raised the car up, like I said, Joanne was just delirious. She was really hollering and screaming, and that's where the noise really came into effect. And I could look back behind me, and I could see the blood, and the pain coming out of them as they were hollering. Kelly was hollering too. My wife had a very low tolerance to pain, and if she'd have been conscious, I'd have hurt her. And the fact that I felt that my son was dead, I just kind of thought in my own mind that my wife was dead too.
Yeah, I believe they had to pry the door open here to get him out, but once we got the door pried open, then pretty much we could put enough pressure on it to get him out.
Driving the other car was James Dahl of DeGraff, Minnesota, who survived the collision. He told troopers he doesn't know how his car got into the wrong lane.
He may have been having a seizure, but there's no way of knowing for sure if that's the cause or if it was that he fell asleep.
Wayne Foss's wife, Fran, and their son, Earl, were both pronounced dead at the scene. Fran wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and the impact had sent her flying from the center row of seats into the back of the van.
The van was on its side, she was on her back, and the two children, of course, were on top of her. They got flown on top of her. She had her head bent backwards and kind of facing the outside. She was looking outside the van.
Their son, Earl, in the front passenger seat, caught the full force of the collision. He was crushed and died almost instantly. Earl's wife, Joanne, suffered a broken jaw and an injured eye. Her baby, in an infant seat, escaped injury. Wayne Foss had serious chest injuries. His daughter, Kelly's back was broken. His grandson, Jeremiah, suffered 2 broken legs. A year later, those injuries are healing, but the pain of losing Fran and Earl remains.
Yeah, early on, I used to look at the pictures quite a bit. Just a matter of, I guess, not wanting to let go. And as time has gone on, he was a young, enjoy life type guy. He'd just gotten out of the service. She was a very energetic person. She was a live wire.
She was a mom. She threw out a lot of love, that's for sure. Hi.
The wreck changed the family's lives dramatically.
Tacos.
Oh, good. Good. We can use that.
I've just taken on a lot of responsibilities. I don't know, making dinner and stuff. I have no idea how to do very much of it. Just be blessed. And
Thank you. The emotional battle that continues on. You kind of wish you could just turn a switch and shut that off, but it doesn't work that way. You've got to really deal with it in your own mind, and it takes time. It just takes time. 1 second, maybe less than a second, it does just horrendous damage. That's for sure.
These pictures are from the baby shower from this daughter and her son.
7 o'clock Saturday evening. Jack and Kay Harris were in Annandale visiting their new grandson at a belated baby shower for their daughter. At 7:30, Jack and Kay began the drive home to Mendota Heights. They drove through Maple Lake.
I had the perception to know that there was trouble on the other side of the highway.
A car had stopped on the other side of the road. A silver Mercury behind that car swerved onto the shoulder to avoid it. The driver of the Mercury lost control, slid across the highway, and hit the Harris Chrysler head-on.
The crash was so hard that when the car finally landed in the ground, it turned the car 180 degrees around and then literally dropped us into a culvert.
Jack Harris was lucky. He escaped with bruises and a broken foot. The other driver, Dora Anderson, broke both ankles. But Kay Harris, Jack's wife of 31 years, bled to death from internal injuries.
As a result of not having a seatbelt on, of course, and going across into the steering column and dash part of the vehicle.
Wright County Sheriff Darrell Wolf saw the collision happen.
She had a very good possibility to survive had she had a seatbelt on, yes, because as you say, there was certainly room in the vehicle.
By 8 o'clock Saturday night, 6 people were already dead. The weekend was barely half over. Near Ogilvie, high school students were getting ready for the prom that Saturday evening. One was Danny Havernan, a quiet 17-year-old. They took pictures at Danny's house, Danny in his tux, his date, Jenny Carlson, in her formal. His stepfather let Danny take their new red Chevy that evening. The couple left Danny's house and went to the high school. They danced till midnight, stopped back briefly at Danny's home, then drove 40 miles to St. Cloud, where they pulled into a Hardee's restaurant for a bite to eat. Two kids having fun on their first prom. But at 1:50 that Sunday morning, the fun ended. An unmarked police car sped into this intersection at Lincoln and St. Germain in St. Cloud. The police car hit the Chevy broadside. Danny's car rolled over. Jenny Carlson was shaken up but uninjured. Her date, Danny, hemorrhaging and in shock, died 20 minutes later.
You could never tell, how much it hurts you, or how it makes you physically ill or anything.
The county sheriff called Danny's parents 2 hours later to tell them their son had died.
It's not like anything you can prepare yourself for. It's so sudden. It's such a wrench. It's just tore. You've never had a chance to even think of the possibility. And if you do think of it, you ignore it. And then when it happens, it just tears you all apart.
This is the story of 4 young men, a 15-year-old girl, and a way of life in this small town of Frazee near Detroit Lakes. Frazee is rural, farming, fishing, hunting, snowmobiling, drinking, and cruising in cars. What happened that Saturday night is the sort of thing usually described as a freak accident, and yet...
It's just our lifestyle. I don't know what it is. It's just probably boredom is what it ends up being. And as soon as you get old enough to drink around here, you hit the bars. You get together a bunch of your friends in a car or pickup or whatever, and you go and pick up a couple, 2 or 3 cases of beer, whatever everybody likes to drink, and you just take to the roads and start drinking and going. And we usually put on 300-400 miles in a night when we do that.
That's how it started this Saturday night. 2 young men finished up their chores here on the family farm, 23-year-old Dennis Bruni and his 19-year-old brother, Eddie. About 10:30, Dennis and Eddie picked up their friend, 15-year-old Tanya Hansen, and headed for a tavern pool hall in Frazee. There, they met 22-year-old Lyle Molson, recently back from 4 years in the Marine Corps, and Doug Iwanica, a mechanic and outdoorsman. All 5 piled into the Bruni's car with a case of beer. Doug was driving.
So I would say they're pretty well buzzed, yeah. I mean, pretty good. Fired up, I would say.
Tanya took us out to the country road where the accident happened that warm Saturday night. She said Doug, the mechanic, was practicing Dukes of Hazzard style driving, full-speed U-turns and spins called donuts. They went into a ditch once, got out, and then...
2 minutes before we even hit, I just kind of said, I bet you we get in an accident.
Tanya says at 2 a.m., Doug, with the last can of beer in his hand, whipped the car into another donut. The car slid off the road, flipped over, and landed upside down in a flooded ditch. The car began filling with water.
I just went over to the corner. The window was open about that much, and I don't know why. I could breathe there, but it was different.
How long were you there?
For at least half an hour.
Did you just sit there and...
Well, I panicked, started hyperventilating, started screaming, and then after he stopped kicking and that, I just lost it. I don't know. Everybody was gone around me and just kind of, oh wow, what do I do now?
Then Tanya saw headlights and screamed. It was Jason Nicholson and 2 friends who happened to be driving by and spotted the car lying upside down in the ditch.
When we got out, we thought we heard something, so we shut off the truck because it was pretty loud, dual exhaust and stuff, and right away we heard, help, get me out of here. So I reached in there and somebody grabbed a hold of my arm, so I just pulled back on it and she come bubbling out of there.
The right rear tire went over.
When Lieutenant Warren Rethwish of the Becker County Sheriff's Department arrived, all 5 people had been pulled from the car, but only Tanya was alive. All 4 men had drowned.
The alcohol report level for the driver of the vehicle was a .17.
He was drunk.
He was well intoxicated, yes. The other people in the vehicle was Dennis Bruni, and he was a .10, legally intoxicated if he would have been driving. Lyle Molson, he was a .13, which was also illegally intoxicated, and then the one that was sitting in the back seat was a .02. So he probably had maybe 2 to 3 beers throughout the whole night.
Eddie was jolly. He was the life of everything. Denny was more serious.
Which one?
Eddie led and Denny followed.
It's not only losing your own son, it's just like losing another 3 boys. You know, it's all almost like a complete family.
The 3 families look back on the accident as unavoidable bad luck, as one of those things.
It was just one of them freak suckers, and there's no way around that. That probably wouldn't happen again in 100 years.
And they drank. Tell me a kid that didn't. But I don't think this was the cause of it.
It's an opinion we heard all over town. No one seemed inclined to change a lifestyle of drinking and driving. Even the men who rescued Tanya. Last year, they saw 6 of their best friends killed in drunken accidents.
We've had a few ditch rides ourselves, and we've gotten lucky. There was a couple times that we should have been like this deal here.
Sometimes we've been out driving around, you know, we've had a few beers and everything, and there has been a lot of close calls, and I can still pretty much react, you know, if you can still see straight and if you're not half passing out, I don't think there's anything that you should be avoided about.
They took their own lives. They didn't injure some other innocent family. They won't drink no more, I guess.
About the same time the 4 young men died in Frazee early that Sunday morning, a 23-year-old motorcyclist headed south on Penn Avenue around Highway 12 near downtown Minneapolis. At 18 minutes after 2, drunk and without a helmet, he ran into a post and flew off his motorcycle, hitting his head on the pavement. He was taken by ambulance to Hennepin County Medical Center and pronounced brain dead. The family requested he be removed from life support. Pat Berg was pronounced dead at 3:32 Sunday afternoon. In less than an hour that Saturday night, 6 young Minnesota men, aged 17 to 23, were killed. Pat Berg, Danny Havernan, Doug Iwanica, Lyle Molson, Eddie Bruni, Dennis Bruni. And the weekend wasn't over.
He always was smiling. Well, not always, but he did have his bad times, but he would always make me smile. He'd tell funny jokes or dumb jokes just to make me smile. And he always did anything for me.
Mary Warzeka was Ron Toll's girlfriend. They'd gone together for 9 months, even though he lived in Long Prairie and she lived 30 miles away in Eagle Bend. On Saturday, May 5th, Ron drove to Eagle Bend to take Mary to his junior prom.
Well, they came here about 12 o'clock in the afternoon, him and his friend Mark Graves. And I pinned the flowers on. My mom took some pictures, and then we left in the van, and we were laughing and joking around, playing the music loud.
They drove back to Ron's house near Long Prairie and met several other couples, including Carrie Wald and her date.
We went out to Ron Toll's house, and Ron's mom took pictures of us, and none of us smiled. And then she cracked a dirty joke, I don't remember what it was, and we all smiled and I turned my face. It was our junior prom, and it was gonna be a great night, you know.
They all drove to St. Cloud for dinner at D.B. Searles, then back to Long Prairie for the prom at the high school.
And we stayed there and danced, and Ron kept he took off his vest, or his suit coat, and then his vest, and then his tie, and then his shirt came off, and Mary goes, "Ron, put that on." He's running around the gym, so we all just kind of laughed at him.
It was a long night, 4:45 in the morning, before Ron took Mary back home to Eagle Bend.
He'd fall asleep and he'd start going off the road. I was straightening out everything in the van while he was driving, and he'd be going off in the road, and I'd be going, "Ron, Ron, Ron." And
Then he dropped me off and we said goodnight.
He probably drove 30 miles that night when he took his girlfriend home. Or 30 miles back, I should say, pretty close. And I can just see him in the van. He set the cruise control for 55, he always did. And he got on the road that he's driven 1,000 times and he fell asleep. And he was always a sound sleeper. The van went down the ditch, followed the field, and hit the driveway approach. And Ron went out through the window, and the van ended up on top of him and killed him. If he'd had the seat belt on and shoulder harness, he'd have been fine.
Between 8 and 8:30, Ron's mom came barreling in our house, and she said that Ron had died. And I just laid in my bed, unbelieving. I didn't believe it. It was really strange. It was like he was there. I'd just seen him a few hours ago, and he wasn't there anymore.
I was getting ready for church. I had to drag myself out of bed because I was so tired. And Sheila called me up, and I thought she was going to tell me Ron was going to pick me up or something. And she told me that Ron had died, and the first couple months it was really hard. I mean, all the things he gave me and all the letters we wrote, I just read them all the time. But now I put all the little things in a box. And whenever I feel like thinking about Ron, well, I think about him every day, but when I want to cry, I'll take the things out of the box and look at him and read his letters again.
We went to a graduation for our niece, and my brother-in-law's mother, whom I hadn't known before, came up and asked if we were the ones that just lost our son, and I told her yeah. And she said that they'd lost a daughter, and I asked her if it got any easier. And she says it gets a little easier to think about it, she says, but that was 30 years ago, and I haven't went one day without thinking of her. And I know that's going to be true. That the years go by without ever a day going by without thinking about Ron.
At 10:26 that Sunday morning in Kimball, Minnesota, 70-year-old Blanche Pearson was driving and eating a sandwich. Blanche went through a stop sign at the intersection of Highway 15 and 55. A pickup truck hit her car, sending it into the path of a bus. The bus then plowed into it. Blanche Pearson died at the scene of massive head injuries. She was the only one of the 17 people killed on Minnesota roads that weekend who was wearing a seatbelt. Sunday afternoon near International Falls, Harold Greason was out riding his motorcycle. Greason was 56 years old, a father of 6, and a grandfather. On nice weekends, he used his motorcycle to enjoy nature. He always wore a helmet. This Sunday at 4 p.m., for an unknown reason, Harold Greason went off the road, struck a tree, was knocked out, landed in some water, and drowned.
It was the first time I'd ever been in a truck before.
On Sunday night, May 5th, Wendy Christensen went for her first ride in a semi. She and her friend, Sean Travis, were driving from Chaska to La Crosse. By 5 minutes to midnight, they were driving through Egan.
And I was just talking, you know, having a great old time, drinking a can of Coke, and the next thing I know, I saw this bright light.
The bright light was from the headlamps of an old Ford Mustang, which had been approaching on the other side of divided Highway 13. Without warning, the Mustang veered left, jumped the concrete highway divider, and slid sideways into the path of Sean's semi.
He came right in front of us. I mean, he bounced right in front of our truck, and he was facing, we went right over the front end of the car.
Wendy and Sean were uninjured, but the driver of the Mustang, 42-year-old Terry Gageby, bled to death.
It's like a bumblebee colliding with a freight train.
Yeah, pretty much. When I got to the scene, there were no signs of life from the driver at all.
Highway Patrolman Scott McCallan and Jim Mayasich took us back to the crash scene. Mayasich had truck driver Sean Travis's blood tested to see if he had been drinking.
He tested a 0.
There was no alcohol in his system?
No, none at all.
Gageby's body was taken to a local hospital where it was also tested for alcohol.
And it did come back a .21 alcohol concentration, which is twice the legal limit.
Gageby had been drinking all evening long at La Fonda's, a Mexican restaurant in Eakin. Trooper McCallan says the bartender at La Fonda's should have noticed Gageby was drunk.
I believe a bartender owes it to the public to see that the person that he has basically been feeding drinks to gets home safely.
La Fonda's restaurant has changed managers since Terry Gageby's fatal accident. The new manager told us La Fonda's does make sure drunk patrons get home safely.
Terry was an extremely likable guy. All his friends, he had a lot of friends.
Dwayne Quinn was a friend of Terry Gageby. They spent several hours that night drinking together at La Fonda's.
Could you tell if he was high at all?
No, Terry was the type of guy that you really couldn't tell whether he'd been drinking a lot. I don't know whether it's a good point or not, saying that someone can handle their liquor that well, but it's extremely hard to tell with someone like Terry that he didn't seem like he was inebriated to me.
You get the denial from other people that are involved in this. The people that are drinking with them or they're with them during that evening, you know, saying that, oh no, I don't think he might have had 1 or 2 type of drinks. It's kind of like, when deep down maybe they're thinking, you know, maybe I could have done something to prevent this.
Terrence Gageby was the last of the 17 people to die that weekend in May. It was finally over.
At times you wonder if what you're doing out here is doing any good. It was such a needless loss of life a year ago, the first weekend in May. It was simply not a safe weekend to travel Minnesota highways.
Almost since the birth of television, this is how we have shown you traffic crashes. Twisted wreckage, the pulsating glare of emergency lights, uniformed men scurrying to save lives and restore order. Sometimes a cry of pain or a look of anguish, a dazed stare of disbelief, and sometimes a shrouded body, all in 30 seconds or so on the evening news. We showed you those pictures, of course, because we thought you cared, and because we believed such violence ought not be ignored. But there was something missing in all those pictures of sudden death. Most of you didn't know those people. In effect, they were anonymous. And the fatal statistics we reported every holiday, every year-end, were anonymous. In the course of preparing this documentary, we discovered we'd been covering the wrong story all along. All those pictures were true enough, but they missed the point. We told you often of death, but seldom of the character of the lives that were lost so suddenly. And perhaps as a result, we never fully understood that all those bodies lying beside the road were really us. So tonight we'll leave you with the real story and the right pictures of some of the 610 men, women, and children killed last year.
It is a nightmare, this endless parade of violence, pain, and death on our highways.
But we are awake now, and we have a fresh new dream. Project Lifesaver's ultimate goal that this year in Minnesota, no one, not one person, will die in a motor vehicle crash during the Memorial Day weekend.
But we need your help. We mailed nearly 50,000 copies of this Lifesaver guide to virtually every school, church, business, doctor, and service club in Minnesota, asking them to take action with you to end the needless death and destruction on our highways.
So tomorrow, make sure that your employer, your church, your club, and your children's school have joined Project Lifesaver. If they haven't, ask them to call our information line at 612-340-9525.
And begin with us tonight to take action yourself. Buckle up and make sure your family does too.
Don't drive drunk, and make sure your friends don't either.
And join us tonight at 10:35 here on Channel 4 for a live town meeting to learn what more we all can do to end the nightmare.
Join us. Be a lifesaver.
Because we're all traveling down this road together.
Good night.